Hello, welcome. My name is Jamie Colston. This is the I Am, We Are podcast channel. This is me and my friends exploring together interesting questions that we're in. The purpose is to share the discoveries and the curiosities that we have that are emerging and to connect to a wider community and network of people. Today I am speaking with Nic and Ivo. We meet every now and again in a room full of constellators who are there to serve a client in the discoveries that they are looking for to live a better organizational life, mostly. And occasionally we will turn up at workshops where it's about personal stuff too. So Nic and Ivo, do you want to introduce yourselves as well?
Hello, and it's absolutely a pleasure to be here. So thank you very much for inviting us. So Nic and I, we met 4 years ago. Yes, time is flying. Yeah. And we did so in the CSC course, which is obviously designed for the constellators, anyone who wants to become a constellation facilitator. And I remember from the very first day, I definitely noticed Nic over there with her presence. And I think that the rest is a history, that we had a very good connection. So with few words about myself, my main job for over the last 20 years has been really to be an entrepreneur in the different businesses. And although I originally thought that my constellation journey is going to be all about the business world and business constellation. Very, very quickly, I realized that going into the systemic family constellation is something which is very close to my heart.
Yeah. So I even had a history with constellations before I met Ivo. I've worked in corporate for a long time and left that last year. But I had across it in 2018 with some amazing women and teachers, Jill and Moira, and they were using strengths to orient around a question in a constellation format. So kind of really looking at your personal strengths around a working question. So that was kind of the first time I practically done it. And then my journey into constellations really accelerated from there. I did some planning. I did Colpi, which I think you did as well, Jamie. And then with Ivo, I've gone through the majority of what CSC have to offer. So it's a really, really big part of my life, actually, in a way that I kind of never would have guessed the first time I did it.
And now we have the honor to run the workshops together, I think. And so we quite often have groups and we offer different themes of the constellation workshops. And obviously one-to-one help for people is well. So this is all in London. And this is all very exciting.
Yeah. So thanks for having us, Jamie.
Thanks. So before we begin, I'm just going to explain a couple of terms for people listening. So CSC is the Centre for Systemic Constellations, which is a mainstream training school in the UK, and COPI is Community of Learning, Practice and Innovation, which is a great name, very long, that's why it's shortened. And so what we're going to do as the first question to introduce this work to everybody is, what is systemic constellations to you, and how do you apply this way of seeing the world to who you are and the way that you do the work you are doing?
So I think important is to start from how this work found me or how I found the work. This was years ago in other country where someone recommended for me to take part of the systemic constellation, and it was a one-to-one session with someone. I never heard about it before, so I went there with high hopes, but I had absolutely no clue what to expect from. And the first half an hour was like any therapy session where we just having a very nice chat, and I felt very in a very good place until the facilitators then said that we should start now. And that was the moment where something triggered in me. It was like, what are we actually going to start here? The next moment was felt on the floor. Some of the figures were introduced to me, and I remember me being absolute introvert. I was cringing a little bit, worried that what's going to happen next year. Are we doing some theatrical show? And the man then gave me a pillow and asked me to repeat some sentences, which obviously my cringe was through the sky from this moment. But for what it's worth, 5 minutes later, that pillow became the most important thing in my life at that moment, when the tears were running through my eyes and I was in the middle of the room, realizing that something very magical has happened. And this is exactly what I needed to pursue for the rest of my life, which ended up to be coming back to London and seeking what is the best school for to attend to become a constellator myself. And years later, the rest is really history.
Yeah.
I shared a little bit about my journey before, but for me, I work in both the organizational and the family realms. And what I really love about Constellations is it has structure to it. It has, the orders that govern constellations. But to me, what makes it really powerful and really interesting is I find it to be a really gentle lens to look at things. And I mean, and it reveals extraordinary things, of course, as part of the process. But I find it kind of quite a gentle way to understand some of the things that, for me, some of the more personal ones that I've found troubling in myself, like patterns of behaviour and things like that. So I think it gives it broader context and allows us to zoom out from our kind of little lives into this bigger place. And that to me is very comforting and really a really beautiful way to see yourself in this broader context with all our ancestors and everything, all the gifts and the things we inherit from them.
And just say a bit more about like how, I just remember one of the people who introduced me to Constellations saying it's like once you start learning, you have this pair of glasses that you can put on, and all of a sudden you can see this sort of other picture of things that are happening. And so I'm wondering, as you navigate your daily lives and the places that you're in, how does it help you see things in a slightly more curious way, perhaps?
You're quite right. There's the original desire to go to school to become a facilitator. Now, when looking back, and his thought was quite naive in sense of wanting to become a facilitator actually ended up learning about yourself and changing your life in everyday context. And there is absolutely no doubt that every aspect of our lives, and including my entrepreneurship where I'm running the businesses, the constellation is now the absolutely major part how I am dealing with people and the processes, and how it has enabled me to see the bigger picture behind the obvious story, which everyone sees it first. And the enormous amount of patience we learn to see that everything is not black and white. There is something behind it. And seeing the negativity in the sense of you don't have to forgive, but you can understand. And they can give very different energy in order to move the things into the right place.
I mean, I can give you a really simple practical example, actually, Jamie. I mean, in a working context, I think, you know, one of the things we attend to is like the time and hierarchy. And I used to manage a team of people, and I inherited some of those the people working for me, and some of them had been in the company for significantly longer than I had. I have older than me, and you know, so just really like even really simple things like naming that and acknowledging that in the broader team, like, you know, this is this person, they've worked in the company for 26 years, you know, and I haven't, you know, and as being really, really clear about those sorts of things. I mean, I find those and those kind of small rituals or those small things you can bring to a working organization that kind of settles everything down. I find really tremendous. It doesn't have to be, you know, it doesn't have to be these big moves. But in the personal context, or I mean, it's similar in the personal context. I think it's been really useful for me. I think you know, it gives me a gentler lens to see myself and other people through. So I really appreciate that. And it's also helped me, I think, see patterns in our family that kind of are a little bit anomalous. You know, everyone's family has their own kind of stuff, but, you know, being able to see different patterns in our family and you go, oh yeah, I wonder what that's about, you know, and maybe drawing a line backwards into the ancestors to see. And I've been really tremendously supported by my mum with that, actually, who kind of has a good memory for lots of things and enjoys talking about this. And also one of my cousins who's Carol, who's a professor in social history, she actually kind of maps our family history. So I'm really, really supported in terms of understanding and knowing those things. And her and I get to kind of nerd out about the family history and her kind of more academic side and my more woo side, I guess, and do that. So it's, for me, it's, I mean, it kind of is. It's one of those things, I think, you know, you talked about it being a pair of glasses you can take off and on, but I'm not sure that you can actually really take them off.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of like a gender. Yeah. So.
So there's two things I want to pick up on. One that just emerged from just listening to you both is a reminder that one of the really beautiful things in Constellations training and practice, I think, is the attention and care around beginnings and endings. You know, there's so much at the beginning of a training that is, you know, you spend a whole 3 days on really taking care of the beginnings, which includes naming, you know, your place within things. Like, are you the youngest or the oldest in the group? Like, where are you in the sort of like the line of age and wisdom in the room? And just thinking about, you know, like how transformative that would be as a sort of everyday practice within life and within our teams and organizations and our families, and endings as well. And just the other piece was we saw each other a couple of weeks ago and we'll see each other next week, and I was just thinking about when you said in the workshop about how woo things can get sometimes, and I thought about it over the last week or so, and I've been really really going, yeah, do you know what, some of the work that we do can absolutely feel like that. And when we start to describe it and name it into the other places of normal everyday life, it's not so woo at all, is it? It's just, you know, you can we can feel things that we don't necessarily name and describe, but that happen. And just a little example from this morning, my daughter and I were listening to Radio 1, and the DJ Molly King is doing a bike ride from I can't remember where it's from and to, but it's following the route of her family basically, and they were talking about her dad passing away, and they had a famous musician come on, and in the middle, from nowhere, he just started talking about how you'll see signs from your dad like on your journey and he'll be there supporting you. And it was just this really deep moment in the middle of like a normal nonsense radio thing that we laugh at, and you could feel it coming through the airwaves, and it was just like, wow, that's incredible, you know, to bring that kind of what we would maybe name as a sort of more spiritual way of looking at things, into the everydayness, and just how that that there's a truth to it when you listen. And so those are the sort of curiosities that I have at the moment.
Yeah, and I can speak to that. I mean, I say it's woo, and it is woo when you try and kind of understand. I guess, and that's not to say that there's not science kind of coming through now. You've got brilliant people like Sarah Payton, who's been neuroscientist, doing all of work around this and all sorts of things like that. But then, the woo is really when you kind of try and intellectualize it too much. And I think the thing I always kind of think about, it's just things that happen in each constellation that really touch you, and to me, that's kind of a body wisdom. It's kind of that knowing, you can't explain exactly why you understand this to be exactly true. But there's something that shifts in you, and you kind of go, they're not, and it is, it does sound a bit weird that it's, there is that element of, sure, it's weird that like when stuff like that happens, you absolutely know. Yeah.
That reminds me the early years of my constellation journey, where if you are outside of this environment and someone finds out that you're connected to the systemic constellation, and then they're going to ask this famous question, so tell me more about it. And that's a trap. You should never answer that.
Yeah, run.
And the very as you're trying to explain, because clearly you have a passion, and you're noticing yourself that the more you're trying to explain, the worse it sounds, and you're starting to see how the people are a little bit taking height down, and then some comments will be dropped, such as, "Oh, my friend is a shaman as well," and then you're realizing that you just wasn't able to explain what's going on. As you said, I think the theory behind that is that this work is very much about subconscious mind, and we're working on the soul level. And how do you explain to someone in cognitive level something which needs to be understood in the soul level? So the best and pretty much only way to really make sense of it is to experience this work. And I've seen the biggest skeptics in the world coming to those workshops, and they are being very, very moved very fast. So that's why this work is so powerful that once it touches you, it's really hard to take the goggles off.
I think they touched a little bit on some of the corporate aspect of it as well, and how you can kind of practically apply it. And I think it doesn't necessarily, it can still make sense in that context, and it doesn't have to be, a really, wildly spiritual journey. It can still be really impactful in those spaces. I do know what you mean when you try and explain it to people. I kind of did so. I work on systemic change, and I stole this absolutely from Gay, who's one of our teachers, but I work on systemic change, and that can apply to families or teams and organizations. And that's a really, and those people are interested, maybe they need to go.
It's always at different layers of the work. So you have this psychotherapeutic layer where the facilitator obviously have to understand how the mind works and how the emotions work and trauma and family systems work. But then we have this phenomenology, and that's the hard bit to explain. So
Yeah.
It works. We know it works. How does it work? We don't know. As you mentioned, Sarah Payton and neuroscience, they're studying it heavily.
Yeah.
I heard the stories that Constellations have done in MRI scanners and trying to understand what happens with the brain. And we don't know the answers yet. No. But I'm personally very fine with it, not to know the answers. We need to know that it works, and that's the most important.
Yeah, and I think you can, if somebody's really kind of skeptical, one of the simple things I would say is like, that feeling when you walk into the house and you know whether someone's home or not, whether or not you know cognitively they're home. You can feel them in the house, It's like when I come home and my dog's away, the house feels colder and more empty, I think most people know that feeling. in themselves. So people do, even even the most skeptical people, I think, do have a sense of sensing things.
Yeah.
Living in Ireland, if you understand. No.
I'm just thinking about the sentence behind you because, in Constellations work, we also rely on sentences a lot to kind of connect us to what is really deeply true and meaningful to us. And just the bit behind you, which is all I want for you is to forever remember me as loving you. And, like I say that to myself most of the time whenever I'm in, or a version of that, whenever I'm in sort of a conflictual place with either of my children or somebody in my family, just to go back to that sense of like, why am I saying or behaving in this way? Like when that is what I want, when all I want is for you to remember that I love you. So that kind of takes me back into my body and into my felt sense and into, potentially what the grief is, potentially like the story of like, oh, that didn't exist in my family experience when I was young. And so actually what I'm trying to do now is something different, but that also acknowledges and leans into what I've been given. And I think, phenomenology as a term is really about like how we experience knowing in our body, right?
Absolutely. And I think that coming to face with our super egos in the process is the hardest bit, because our super ego is obviously trying to protect us, but at the same time, looking at the ego from the side and trying to surrender it, it's almost like trying to give up your existence. That's how it feels in those moments. And you're quite right. The questions we need to sit with is where is this coming from? Is it the grief? Why am I acting like that? I love you, but then again, I am being perhaps unfair towards you. Where does this belong to? And those are the questions which shouldn't be only digging in the constellation environment, but wider world. If we could break through that and make more people to ask those questions, the world.
I mean, there's something you're saying that I've been kind of playing with in my brain as well, and it's not really a well-formed thought, so forgive me. But I do think there's this balance as well, right? Of accountability, personal accountability and our lives and this work. And in some ways, the way I kind of think about this myself, it's like, I can look back and understand what's been going on. What I might be kind of with that's kind of coming through me from an ancestral perspective, and then turn around and be like, okay, I've got that. Thank you very much. Like now I'm going to improve myself or understand that enough to kind of shift my orientation.
Absolutely.
I think part of me is like, because we know each other through sort of being involved in this work and seeing each other at sort of regular impulses around the work as well. And in the sort of spirit of sort of getting to know each other, maybe you can say a bit about maybe you can say a bit more about sort of like, what's the way in which you are bringing those practices from the Constellations work and from other practices that you have, and sort of really living and embodying them and bringing them into the different spaces that you inhabit?
That is I just felt it how this question.
Yes.
It really touched somewhere very deep, and there's a caution also to give that plausible answer here, with meaningful answer. So, as I mentioned with a few words earlier, that the constellation now in my life is everywhere. But what is interesting to see that the people with whom I'm working with outside of the constellation practices, they follow you naturally. So you don't need to explain, or you don't have to push it. It's very effortless from their side. And it's this sentence comes to me: monkey sees, monkey does. Perhaps it's very unfair a way to explain it, but
Like a regular check.
if we really put our actions as a role model out there, then this is the biggest influence to the world. That instead of trying to convince someone verbally, or trying to make an argument about the things and pushing it, that no, you definitely have to try it. And I'm pretty sure that in the Constellation work as a facilitator, we all know how important it is to take a step back and let the work to do itself. And sometimes it's very tempting to see the resolution and push it. But really the greatest facilitations are coming when you step back and let the magic happen itself. Yes.
That's true. In a practical way, for me, I think there's a lot of this work shows up in the conversations I have with my friends. You know, I have a really lucky to have a really thoughtful and beautiful group of friends, and where we're not afraid to have, you know, very deep and heartfelt conversations. So, you know, it's certainly something I can offer to them. I'm also mindful not to overstep my mark and, you know, try and facilitate something in a conversation. Although that does remind me of, you know, meeting with a group of fellow constellators for breakfast. You know, we often go out for breakfast and we'll sometimes constellate using things on the table, and then someone comes to clear the table, we're like, don't touch the auntie, you know, protecting a tea bowl or a sugar bowl or something like that. You know,
Yeah.
as you do. Yeah, I always feel, I don't know whether I feel sorry or I think they're really fortunate if those people are sitting next to us. But anyway, you know, for me, I think, you know, being able to offer some of those lenses, it's just kind of a shifting of the way that I can see for other people. It's actually always sometimes, for me, actually personally anyway, easier to see things for other people than it is for myself. So in my personal life, I tend to, you know, try and get that support from supervisors and attending constellations with other people, and showing up as a rep, working as their teachers. But, you know, I also think, you know, doing small things, like I mentioned, I was working until August, and Alexandra, who you've also interviewed for this, does amazing kind of systemic ritual work. Really, really brilliant. You know, so as I was kind of finishing work, which wasn't a nice ending from the perspective of the company necessarily, or not the most well held, but Archer, you know, I needed to kind of design a ritual for myself where I kind of walked through that through that journey of being in that company for that time, and, you know, gathered up what I received and you know, left nothing behind that is mine anyway. So, you know, and I think so. I think, you know, this work can also give you a sense of giving yourself the things that you're not necessarily getting from somewhere else, like giving yourself a good ending if that's what you need. Or
Yeah. Thanks. And it's the things that you both said are just reminding me, you know, like part of the purpose of these conversations, as well as introducing people to this work and to these practices, is also like, what does mentioned as supervision, you know, being part of a community of practice. We see each other and other people that, you know, and we're in this work fairly regularly. And so maybe we can just say
The importance of good constellation, good facilitation. Of course, there are layers. It's important. The good facilitator is the one, in my opinion, who is well trained, has experience, and experience not only as a facilitator, but really attending to the workshops, and even having this podcast as we just talking, or whoever is listening to it, how important it is to have that other point of view and widen your lens. But as I mentioned earlier sentences as well, there's a very, very fine line where constellators sometimes might feel that they want to make the work about themselves. But they are the ones, what was the reason why the resolution was found. And that's for me has been always the very much danger line. The people who've been doing the constellations for 20, 30 years, even the great constellators, they always know that knowing nothing at some point is the most valuable thing. And of course, we're living in a materialistic world where we're getting rewarded for knowing, it is very difficult for us to take a step back and say that actually, let me sit with not knowing. And sometimes in the constellation, when we see that the energy is really, really going towards the right one direction, even then we have to sometimes take a step back and really see, is there anything else which I'm missing over here? Is there anything else we are not including? And that's the tricky part of the constellations, isn't it? Is that you have to have this psychotherapeutic understanding people, understanding their family systems, but at the same time, not knowing and sitting and surrendering to yourself, to the goodness of this work itself.
There's some really great article or talk actually by Liz Gilbert, who I really think is quite fantastic. And she's talking about writing her second novel, and everyone, well, not everybody herself sees it as, the muse is something you show up for and it kind of comes through you in a way, rather than you owning the genius yourself. And I think for me that's such a nice position. It's really humble as a position to take. It's not actually about you as a facilitator at all. It's kind of, you're fortunate to be doing it, and it's work that really kind of comes and moves through you and through the people and that show up to the work every time. You're really lucky with that stuff. In terms of best practice, I think especially when people are starting out, which is where Ivo and I started working together. I think working with another practitioner alongside of your facilitating workshops is a really smart move. There's a lot that can happen in a constellation. You can't always see it all. So having a backup is I think, a really strong, particularly position of scope. Having two people together. So when we work together leading a workshop, we take turns at facilitating constellations. There'll be multiple throughout the day, but it's great to have someone you can kind of look to and get gleans.
Because they ultimately, we have the only one mission here, and this is to help people and have people's issues as a force. And it's not about how great we were, how much our egos got massaged. So it is solely to do with helping people. And I don't think, at least in our circles we know, there anyone who's actually doing it for the main focus of being paid. I think the biggest reward, what we're getting from this work, is to
be in the field, to do the work.
And really see the results for those people, what that work offered, and we just being one piece of the puzzle in it.
Yeah,
I think you just match up and, you just allow it. Sorry, Penny.
No, I was just saying it's making me smile because it's like, for me, it's if I cover the room hire and the good biscuits that I buy for everybody, then like we're good.
You got good biscuits. I'm coming to one of yours then. That's good.
Yeah, I honestly, best snacks ever. I think the thing that I was reflecting on before our conversation this morning as well is that we are sort of another generation on from Bert Hellinger, who sort of is the person who's seen as the sort of founder of this particular aspect of the work. And again, I think if I reflect on other practices that I'm part of as well, it's like I also think we're a generation of people who are able to look back at founding energy of things that we're in now and see them as not necessarily the founding energy, but part of a long history of energies that we are gifted. And, because we are also part of generations of people that have grown up and belong to a part of history where we have these kinds of roles of single identity of people who are like the founders, or the beginners of things, that actually there is a turning and a movement for me, and that part of doing these conversations and being in these conversations is to illuminate that a little bit, and to be in it together, to not kind of to just be in what are the questions that we have around that, and how do we really lean into the longer lineage of being human, and also being part of a wider ecological, cosmic, stardust filled way of life.
And it's shifting as well, isn't it? I think, and you mentioned to us as being, another generation removed. And I think what we're also seeing, and I start to see it in some of our peers and some of the people I come across in this, is how people are taking it in their own particular directions, or, having a degree of creativity around it. And I think it goes back to one thing you mentioned before, is like having the really good training, having the really good knowledge and foundation, and then kind of riffing on it in terms of that. And, I think that's a great privilege to be in that point, so less of the, I think when we look at our founders and our teachers that, we all share some teachers, that have done a lot of hard graft to kind of bring it into awareness. And it really feels like it's in a big tipping point at the moment, actually, with the awareness exploding. And I think you can see that with the number of training courses that are running both at CSC and in other places as well, that whole partnership that when we did talk, actually, we didn't name check them before, but so I think there's a lot. It feels like a really big shifting time as well. So not to forget the lineage, but that the lineage extends on and out in its kind of own forms beyond kind of this point. I mean, I'm sure in 10, 20 years time we'll be looking at, oh my gosh, look at that. It's quite a different way of working.
Yes, you mentioned Bert Hellinger, and what many people don't know, that actually work itself is coming originally from Zulu community in South Africa, and Bert was the one who actually brought it to Europe and 30 years ago, and introduced the Western society, let's put it this way. And then it feels that the energy behind the work is obviously hundreds of years old, although for us it's something very, very new. But at the same time, the Bert Hellinger really created this foundation so we can be here and we can see that work through that very different lens. And sometimes I have to pinch myself to just realize that how lucky we are to be in this world where we can actually open-mindedly take that work on board and modify that slightly, but not losing the values of the work at the same time.
Mm.
And there are some things Bert Hellinger said and done which perhaps we not resonate anymore that much, because it was very experimental for him when he obviously started it. And so that experiment should carry on for the generations to come.
Mm.
And how exciting it will be. What is this work going to be in 100 years from now on? Just that I'm not saying also that this work is the answer to all our problems, but having that systemic understanding of the world and communities and religions and conflicts, this common understanding, this is the resolution.
And if I sum that up and think about it now as well, it's the remembering ourselves back into relationship with all things, right? That's the essence of the work, I think.
Beautiful. stealing that for later.
So we are coming to near the end, and so what I'd love to do is ask you, what is your longing or hope for the world right now in the form of a question? And you can say more words.
Tangent, isn't it?
It's, and this is not premeditated answer, and it might be a little bit messy, but what really comes from my soul is that anyone who looks inwards and looks beyond the obvious and sees their responsibility and their entanglements. It is very, very hard. It is much harder not to see it.
My wish for the work and kind of more broadly in the world, I think is this. I think we're in a bit of an age of self, but I always have this great lot of connection, connectedness. I mean, it shows up as well, like 15 strengths actually, but this connectedness, and it's that to me, it's this kind of like a bit woo. I'm a bit woo. It's okay. A sense of connectedness into everything, into nature and to each other, and having that, holding that sense of kind of just gently holding it, not gripping on, but this sense of like responsibility, for the collective, beyond ourselves. For me, I think that's where this work had a great part to play, and and people who are definitely in it seem to have that kind of sense of holding the wider lens, and that, to me, that is that can be my wish in the direction that kind of the whole will soften into kind of back into kind of collecting a little bit more into that marshy suit of being made of stardust and other things that you mentioned.
And I'm just going to include the way that as you both spoke, then the sunlight came more brightly into my window, even though it's still cloudy. It was like there was this sort of brightness as you were both speaking. So thank you so much for joining me today. And I've really enjoyed the conversation and getting to know you both better. And looking forward to seeing you next week.
Yeah, can't wait. Thanks, Jamie. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.